I think that everyone has done some stupid shit whenever it's come to the gym or fitness related things, trends, even nutrition, right? Like everybody has experimented with something that, in retrospect, is so obviously stupid that I don't even want to talk about it really. But we've all been there. We've all been there. Like we've all fallen victim to a lot of those things. And whether it's something that is extremely obvious in hindsight, or it's one of those things where like it takes an experience of having to have gone through it and made those mistakes and be on the other side of it and potentially even having to live with the repercussions of some of those mistakes. I think that it does give a little bit of authority to people who have been around for quite a while to be able to speak to younger generations of lifters, people who are like coming up right now, like watching TikTok videos and shit. And while I do think that new forms of social media, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, whatever you want to do, like they can find awesome information and new ways of training and new ways of dieting and you know philosophies about health and fitness that otherwise might have been hidden in the past, and those things can get disseminated very freely now, and I think that that's awesome, but it does also open up Pandora's box of fuckery, and I think that that's what most people hopefully are trying to avoid. And if you can listen to something like us going off the riff and just talking about some of the mistakes that we've made in the past, and you can circumvent some of your own trials and tribulations, and maybe we've done our, positive duty for the day. But yeah, just kind of getting into it, I think we both wrote down a few things before hitting record that we would like to tell our younger self if we had the opportunity, right? And whether this is like a mistake, whether it's just general advice that would make our lives easier right now, however we want to classify that, I don't really think it matters too much. But I can actually start, and this is definitely going to fall more in the mistake category because this is something that I am having to deal with on a daily basis now. But one of the big things I wish that I would have done whenever I was younger was actually listen to my body, like listen to the feedback that my body was giving me. And I think that this is a double-edged sword because sometimes people can be too in tune with their body to the point of mind fucking themselves out of doing what needs to be done, even if it's uncomfortable, because training itself is uncomfortable. Dieting itself is uncomfortable. A lot of things in life that are good for you are uncomfortable. So if you are too focused on your body's negative biofeedback, quote unquote, right? If your body is telling you, hey, you should probably stop this, and every time you listen, you can fall into a different type of trap. But by that same token, our bodies are very, very, very finely tuned, precise machines. We're a product of a billion years of evolution for a reason. And it's because we're survival machines, So because of that, our body is very good at giving us information and data points, telling us to, hey, avoid danger. Maybe you should stop doing this. And in training, if you continuously go around those danger signals and those fire alarms that are going off, you're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble. And we see this all the time with, anytime you go into a gym and you see like that old dude walking around and he's got like a semi-limp, he's like all hunched over, you can tell he can't even stand up straight without pain, and he's still in there, deadlifting 400 pounds for reps. And it's like, yeah. It's like he's still in there lifting hard as fuck, but like he's just got Ronnie Coleman syndrome, where he's just so beat up from years of doing shit the wrong way and not listening to his body and pushing through pain and pushing through discomfort. And I don't want to be that person. And I'm sure a lot of people don't want to be that person. And whenever you're 18 years old, you might be hearing this and being like, well, this isn't a problem for today that I have to worry about, right? No, it is. It is. And that's the thing, right? What if I was, I want to say 20, probably 20, around 20, I started dealing with, for the first time in my life, knee issues. And it started out with just some like very slight discomfort whenever I was doing barbell back squats, and didn't really think anything of it. By that point, I was still able to, go in, ride the bike for 5 to 10 minutes, get some blood in there, do some leg extensions, and I could work around it. It wasn't debilitating.
Yeah.
And then I just kept pushing through it and kept pushing through it and kept telling myself, oh, this isn't that bad. It's just a little bit annoying and then it'll go away, whatever. And then one day I was in the gym and I was like, I've been pushing down this knee pain and working around it for the last 2 to 3 months. And now I'm in the gym and I can't do squats because my knees are hurting so bad. And I was 20 years old, right? So it's obviously not good. And then what I ended up doing though was like, okay, cool. I'm going to just find a movement, find an exercise that I can do with less discomfort. So then I moved over to leg press. It's like, okay, cool. Maybe squats were an 8 out of 10 in knee discomfort, and leg press is like a 5 out of 10. And I just kept doing leg press until leg press got to an 8 out of 10. And I moved over to like just a leg extension or to like a split squat variation, and then started at a 5 out of 10 and worked my way up to an 8 out of 10 until I got to the point where I couldn't do any type of quad focused movement without knee pain. And I had gone through just various ups and downs of allowing this to recover to the point of it being like a 5 out of 10 again, and then working my way back up and being a dumbass and jumping right back in and be like, all right, cool. Like I'm going to squat again. I'm going to do hack squats. I'm going to do walking lunges and all of that. And again, because you're young and you think that you're indestructible, it's very easy to fall into that trap. And it's very easy to just think that, oh, this will go away on its own. A lot of things don't just go away on their own. You have to be very proactive and make sure that they go away. And you have to also not be a dumbass. Because if you're a dumbass at 18, 19, 20 years old, it might seem like everything you do, you will eventually recover from. But if you allow something to be persistent for 3, 6, 9, 12 months, that's a chronic problem at that point. And then the only solution is to do something very, very drastic. And most people who are very into lifting, who are athletes, they don't want to voluntarily change things drastically. And by drastically, I mean like, all right, you're not going to train legs again for the next, 3 to 4 months. You're going to go to like PT and you're going to start doing some like actual rehab work. Most people don't want to do that type of stuff. So for me, I was that type of person. And I ended up just convincing myself that it was okay to try to train around knee pain and train around discomfort. And I got myself stuck in this recurring trap of pain, can't do all the things I want to be doing, pull back, allow it to get a little bit better. And then as soon as it gets better to the point where I can start doing some of those things again, I jump right back in, do those things again, pain comes back. So I fucked myself very early on because I wasn't listening to my body as well as I should have been listening to my body. And you can replace knees with, any other body part at this point for me because everything fucking hurts because I've done some variation of that same stupid bullshit, my knees, my hips, my low back, my elbows, my wrists, right? And, maybe it's just a function of me being an idiot and maybe that's not something that everybody else has to worry about. But I think it's less about me specifically. It's more about like a mindset type of thing where it's very easy to fall into these extremist all or nothing mindsets. And we've talked about this. And if you're someone who is, an athlete at heart, or you're very competitive, whether that's with other people or even yourself, right? Like I'm very competitive with myself. So I did not want to have to do the things that were necessary to promote my longevity with what I was doing. And whenever you're young, again, you don't concern yourself with longevity because it's easy to think about the here and now. And it's very hard to project forward. But whenever you're 30, whenever you're 35, whenever you're 50, you wish that your 18-year-old self would have thought a little bit more about, preservation and rehab, prehab, taking care of your body.
No, yeah, 100%. I knew this would be one for you. So I left it off my list. And I think that for me, just having gotten into lifting a little later, deliberate, hard, regimented lifting outside of football, like got into it much, much later. So there are some things that like I've been lucky to dodge or avoid. But like you said, like you feel it's just today. Okay, if I'm sore today, if I'm hurting tomorrow, like I will be okay because history at that point or up until that point has shown you that you will be okay. Because I mean, bouncing back from an ankle sprain at fucking 12 or 13 years old, way different than 32, 33 years old, right? Like 32, 30, you might as well get fucking crutches out, at 12, 13, 14, 15, you can just tie your shoes up tighter and you'll be fine, you know, in hours, let alone like in a week or so, you'll be all right. Being proactive, right? And I think that it's interesting because there's that fine line between, hey, like you said, listening to feedback and am I just being a pussy? Like, am I just not training hard, right? Is this uncomfortable? Does this hurt? Right. And really being able to discern, like, okay, like there's a difference here, right? Pain, like strong, poignant pain should probably be avoided. But discomfort is how change happens, right? Whether you're talking like meta or you're talking like physical, like things happen, change, adaptations occur when something is put in front of something that it has to overcome and is ill-equipped to overcome in its current state, right? So you have to be uncomfortable if you want to grow, if you want to get stronger, so on and so forth. But like you said, like being able to discern, like, okay, I'm not just tired, right? Like I'm running a sprint, right? We know that feeling. Everyone, for the most part, who's listening knows the feeling of running lines, suicides, running outside, and that you finish that 10th sprint and you keel over on your knees, you're breathing, and coach is like, another one. And you in your mind are like, I cannot do another one. I physically cannot. But I'm also at practice. And if I don't run when he says run, he's going to kick me out. So you stand back up. And then lo and behold, after the first 10 yards, you're sprinting, like you're moving. And then you get to the end again and you feel like you're dying again. And so, okay, I'm uncomfortable here, right? But then there's I'm sprinting and I can't fucking see. I'm lightheaded. Like I'm dizzy and about to faint. I should probably say, hold on a second before I fucking vomit and pass out here, right? So very, very different discomfort. And then like, hey, like feedback signal, things are going to start going very south for you here. And we're going to shut things off type shit. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good piece of advice for just young lifters, especially growing up today, where you see a rampant and very readily available source of very young, jacked athletes, right? Like a lot of these people now are like 17 to 23 years old and they're huge, right? Super well-defined musculature, very mature, dense musculature. They also have excellent editing and cameras and things like that. So you are probably chasing that, right? We were just chasing the guy next to us in the gym. Social media wasn't what it was today, but now you have 100 guys who are all 17, who are all fucking jacked. You have no idea what they're doing, right? Whether it's, you know, PED usage, they've been training for X amount of years. Genetically, they're just way better than you. Like, but you now see that. And so when you have those moments that are telling you like, chill, you have that external motivator that's like, well, he's probably not chilling. So I'm going to push a little harder. So you have a lot of things that are telling you to keep going. But thinking about tomorrow, thinking about the next 10 years and what you want to be able to do, because at the end of the day, you'll graduate, right? Like there's a good chance that 99.9% of you that are listening will never be a professional bodybuilder. You probably won't do anything in the realm of your body being all that important, you know, to your career aesthetically, right? You won't have to be something, right? It'll just be something you do because you care about it and you want to be healthy.
And that's another good point too, because I think everybody who goes through any period of taking fitness, training, the gym seriously, especially in bodybuilding, for whatever reason, I feel like bodybuilding is one of those where like people just get sucked into this very easily. But 99.99999, however much you want to carry that out to, percent of people will not be able to make a living off of what they're doing. And granted, now it's a little bit easier to make a living off of these things because there is social media, right? So like in the past, if you wanted to make a living off of training, for example, you only had a few options. It was like, okay, you're going to be a professional bodybuilder and you're going to be on like a Mr. Olympia or Miss Olympia stage. And but even back then, it was pretty much Mr. Olympia because Miss Olympia wasn't making enough money to where that was like her full-time job, I'm sure. But now at least, you know, if you're jacked, you might hit the jackpot and be super lucky, get sponsorships on social media, or maybe you have a podcast and you get sponsors there, or, you know, maybe you have partnerships, or maybe you just turn into a coach and you ride the coattails of your physique, whatever. People can do it in different ways now, but the percentage of people that will be the Phil Heaths, the Kai Greens, the Jay Cutlers, the Ronnie Colemans. I mean, that's not you. Whoever's listening, that's not you. I'm sorry. That you're not going to be that person.
You're
but
not that guy,
everyone,
pal. You're not that guy.
yeah. But we all do have that like glimmer at one point. It's like, maybe if I train hard enough, I can do that, right? Like I don't. Who knows what my genetics are? I could just go in the gym one day and like, in 20 years I look like Ronnie Coleman. It's not you. It's not you. It's not us. It's okay. It's totally fine. And that's something I do think is very important for everyone to know, right? Because if you're not making a living off of training, it needs to be prioritized accordingly.
Yes. And I think that's exactly where I was getting is like, hey, like, what is your goal when you're 30, when you're 40? Do you want to be, a mom or dad? And like for me, it's really important that if my kids are athletes, that I can compete with them. Like I don't want my son to be able to beat me in a race until he's at least 12, right? Like you have to earn this, but that requires me to not have like shit on my body, up until then.
Yeah.
Like really doing the things that put me in the ability or put me in the space to be able to do those things with him and not be like, hey, like that'll watch, right? You do your thing because dad's knee, dad's hip, dad's back. And I'm like, I just don't want to be that guy. So trying to course correct because there was a time where like we just went in, we put chains on everything. And if rep 9 looked anything like rep 10, you were doing rep 11, you were doing rep 12 until like there was severe breakdown, until there was background, and it was like, hey, just fucking go, right? And shut everything else off because this is how we get it. And I think that there's a time and place for that, but just be smart and think about what your end goals are.
Well, maybe we're belaboring this one a little bit longer than it needs to, but I want to draw a very clear distinction and boundary line between destructive pain and potential injury and also recklessness versus discomfort and productive discomfort, or the type of discomfort that leads to growth on the other end, right? And we understand this, right? Like we understand if you subject yourself to things that make you uncomfortable, that there's a stress to the system that then allows that system to get stronger, right? You take a vaccine, well, that vaccine is the virus that it's protecting you from. It allows your immune system to get stronger to then avoid getting sick in the future, right? It protects against that virus. So same thing with training. You introduce a stimulus, and that stimulus makes the system stronger. So the next time it is introduced or encounters that stimulus, it's better equipped to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
So cold plunges, sauna, whatever you want to do there, right? Like again, it's you forcing your system, forcing your body to adapt to something that is outside of the current limits of its adaptability. That's all good, right? But it has to be controlled. And if you do things in an intelligent manner, you can leverage discomfort in a very productive way. But as soon as you start getting reckless, and as soon as you start chasing things just because they're hard, or just because they give you an adrenaline rush, or they scratch that ego itch, then you're putting yourself in the position to get fucked. And I think that that's where we have to be extremely cautious. You bringing up some of the points about whenever we used to train super hard, like we were training hard for sure, like really, really, really hard. At times, I would say maybe borderline a little bit reckless, right? But I do think it's a good idea at times to dip your toes into that water just to know what it feels like. But you don't have to do a cannonball into it, right?
Right.
Like similar to what we talk about with failure training, you need to know what failure feels like, but you don't need to always train to failure. So I view discomfort in a similar sense. You don't always need to be uncomfortable whenever you're training, right? But if you're forcing adaptation to happen, then it's not going to be easy. And if it's not easy, then it's going to be uncomfortable in some degree. But being able to distinguish between like a muscular discomfort or a cardiorespiratory discomfort or even a psychological discomfort versus a joint discomfort, something that's actually painful, like your body giving you signals like, if you do not stop, we might break in half. That's where you need to be able to listen to the body and listen to the biofeedback and be able to parse like the productive versus the destructive.
For sure. So I will, because I was getting kind of into my first one here, a little lighter, and it also kind of like is tangential to what we're encouraging people here. Mine was establishing a why earlier. So I don't know that. I mean, most people don't. And when they walk in the gym, like they're like, "Oh, I want to be big and strong." I was like, "Well, sure." And I want to be fast and powerful. Okay, cool. But there does get a point, right? And then depending on how frequently you're going and how serious you are, this point can come sooner, come later, where your design approach should be in accordance, right? Like for me, it is most important currently for me to maintain a level of power to still be quick and agile without feeling like, oh, if I plant, unilaterally on my left leg, that it's just going to blow out. Like, no, it's very important to me that I can do stuff like this still, right? And
Yeah.
then even, of course, we know like the difference between like hypertrophy training versus strength training, right? And which one you want to do, and understanding that if you don't hold them in their proper balance, you can start to negatively affect not just in your ability to achieve, but like if you are consistently training, 3 by 3 by 3 by 3, whatever, right? If you're doing like really, really heavy, strong man work, and you're also like, I really want to grow and I want to do volume work. Well, what's the negative feedback? How are your joints? What's your system? What's your nervous system like? Are you able to go in and do 1 or 2 volume days a week? So for me, it was definitely a lot of, and I think for you and I both, like we didn't really follow programs. We found movements we liked and we did them. We love our rack pulls. I still love rack pulls to this day. If I had chains in lifetime, I would still use them. I generally just love rack pulls because I do like feeling strong, but I also like the fact that it's advantageously set up in a way that I can get a lot of volume as well. There are things that can kind of blur those lines in beneficial ways, but for the most part, I always want to encourage people to remember why they're doing something, right? Because I do think as I continue to graduate into the elderly, the more time you spend doing something that isn't directly fueling what your end goals are, it's no longer just a net neutral, I can do it tomorrow. You are actively detracting and slowing yourself down on your ability to get to where you want to get to, right? If your goal is healthy joints and still maintaining mobility, flexibility, so on and so forth, and you cut that down to a day or two a week because you still want to keep doing like volume heavy training, well, like you're not hanging out in the middle until you go in again and work on mobility. You are actually working against your ability to go and be more mobile, to be more functional, so on and so forth. So establishing that early, not necessarily bootstrapping yourself, but definitely making sure that you do know why you're doing what you're doing is really important. And this will come with just advancement. Get in there, do something. As you do more and more of something, you will start to figure out what your goals more clearly look like. Again, being intentional in that, going, okay, sweet, this is actually what I want to do. So let me go home and continue to design things that are going to push me towards that.
Yeah, it's good to occasionally take inventory of your macro goals, your middle ground goals, your micro goals, and figure out how what you're actually doing is aligning with each layer level of goals that you have. Because we've talked about this before, like oftentimes the goals that you're trying to achieve in the short term may seem like completely opposite to your long-term goals. But as long as you are understanding what you're doing in a macroscopic view, then you can stack different levels of goals on top of one another and you can link them together to make sure that everything is always pushing towards what you want to accomplish in the long run. So understanding what that long run actually is, so like your why you're doing this, is incredibly important. And most people just go in and fuck around. And I think that that's almost always going to lead to stagnation, if not regression, if not just injury, right? And no matter what your goal is, you need to have a plan. So your goal might just be to enjoy the gym, enjoy training, and use that as a stress relief. And that for a lot of people it is, right? But you can still have a plan around almost lack of a plan, right? You can still keep it fluid and keep it flexible and make sure that your plan is stress free while still maximizing what you're trying to accomplish. I don't think most people want to just waste time and energy in the gym. But most people, like, they're just trying to waste time and energy. And if you were to ask them what they're doing, they wouldn't be able to give you a solid answer for why they're going to the gym. And that to me always just feels like so out of place and weird. Like you're going to the gym for, let's just say, 6 hours a week. 6 hours a week you're spending in the gym. You're eating very healthy. You're very restrictive. You're spending a lot of energy in the gym, training super hard, but you can't even articulate what your goal is. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Why are you training then? What are you doing? So I completely agree with you. Like you need to have some kind of direction to what you're doing. And if you do not, then it's so fucking easy to just be doing bullshit. Just be doing bullshit and going in circles.
Yeah, and I know you probably see it, and I have to like put blinders on in the gym, especially if I know the people in the gym, to not say something when I see them doing something stupid or something that I think is counterproductive to what I know their goal to be. But like Brian and I went back and forth because the dude would come in on his heavy quad day, and every single day he would start with back squats. And if you ever watch Brian train with a barbell, this motherfucker is strong.
Oh yeah,
And
strong.
I'm like, what are you doing? And he was just like, oh, I mean, I just have great activation here. I feel really good here. I'm like, right, but like, how many sets are you doing? Like, actually, you know what? How many working sets are you getting to? Well, I'm getting to like 2 or 3, depending on the week. I'm like, right, but now how many total sets you have to do to get to a working set on a back squat because you're so fucking strong? Oh yeah, I'm like, I have a feeder here. I'm like, you're doing like fucking 4 or 5 feeders before you're getting to something that's hard enough. So now you go 8 sets. And even though that stuff is sub-max volume, that's volume, bro. It's still gonna beat you up. Like,
Especially whenever you're really strong. Especially whenever you're really
yes,
strong. And that's also something that like it's so difficult to explain to people. Like I'll have clients asking me all the time, like, oh, how many feeder sets should I be doing? And I'm like, I can't give you a definitive answer. Like you need to be doing as many as you need to feel ready to go. But that's so individual, right? Like for me, whenever I was deadlifting back in the day, how many feeder sets do I need to do to get up to 700 pounds?
right.
Like a fucking bunch. Whenever you're really strong, you have to do enough feeder and warm up and work up volume to where it actually starts to count. Like I might have done 135 for like, 5 to 10 reps. I might have done, then go 225 and 315 then 405 then 495 then 585 and then like 635. Do you think if I do like one rep at 635 that doesn't count because it's far away from failure and I'm not really struggling with it? No, that fucking counts, right? It counts. It absolutely does. So, that's a good example of everyone just needing to truly understand, like, where you're at, what your goals are. For me, if I am deadlifting 700 pounds, like sumo deadlift, for example, right? That's probably not the best for me if I am just purely trying to grow my hamstrings.
Right.
Like if I really want the most muscular hamstrings possible, I'm probably not going to be deadlifting like 700 pounds sumo barbell for like 3 or 4 or 5 reps, whatever. And for Brian, just going back to the example that you brought up, like he has to be very explicit. Like, are you trying to get stronger on a squat pattern? Are you trying to grow your quads? Or are you just wanting to squat? And to me, it's always funny how often it just comes back to the last one, right? It's like you're doing this because you just want to do it, and you're veiling it with some like pseudo answer, say, "Oh, like I feel really good with it. Like I my quads always feel super sore after I do this." And it's like, yeah, but it's because you want to do it.
Yeah.
You're doing it because you want to, not necessarily because it's the best thing for you or for your goal. But it is often very hard for people to disconnect and dissociate those two things, like your goal versus what you want to do. And we talk about this all the time. Like there's a spectrum between optimality versus enjoyment. And they're often at poles, right? Like they're generally not that close. What is optimal is almost always not going to be very enjoyable. So there has to be some kind of sliding scale along that spectrum where you can fall comfortably and where you can stay, and that is something that you're comfortable with and you are able to sustain that. And where I tend to tell people that they should fall on that spectrum is as far along the optimality end as you comfortably can, because that's where you should almost always be pushing your training to be whenever it comes to like your goals. If you're too far towards enjoyment and entertainment, then you're just too far away from optimality.
Yeah, no, and obviously getting more in depth, like you said, like the conversation has to become, why are you doing this? Like if your goal
Yeah.
is quads, then like you can still keep barbell back squats in, but why not put it in the middle or the latter third of your training session after you've done some sort of heavy fucking machine where you can get to your top set sooner. You can also push more intensely early, and then by the time you get to barbell back squats, you're already warm, you're already ready to go. You don't need near as much load to get the stimulus that you want. You can still get the cute video for Instagram, right? Like you can do all the things still, but if your penultimate goal is like, hey, I quads, it's all right, well, great. Like then you have to treat it like that's your goal. If you just want to squat, like you said, or you want to be stronger in this pattern, then it's like, all right, well, then that's to reappropriate how you hold these priorities. So definitely just like, again, establishing a why early and often. And then why can change. Like just reevaluate, take a second back and then, oh, you know what? I do just want to have fun. I feel stagnated mentally in the gym. So I'm just going to throw lots of fun things. I'm going to do a new workout every single fucking day. I don't care about progression. I care about having fun and reinvigorating this zeal that I had for the gym. Fantastic. If you are doing that though, and you're like, I really want to grow my glutes, and it's like, well, what are we doing, right? Like, how are we tracking this progress? Are we actually choosing optimal movements? So on and so forth. So that was mine. My number 2, I will say, for me, would have been start structured training earlier. So like as a younger athlete, I think there are a lot of advantages for young and even like prepubescent athletes to just begin more structured training plans. Obviously, there's a lot of like fear mongering around like not putting your kids under crazy loads and stunning their growth and fucking their growth plates, so on and so forth. But obviously, again, everything done intelligently. Like you don't want to hurt them. But I do think there's a lot to be gained as a young athlete when I see these like 8 and 9-year-olds like snatching and shit like that. And obviously it's like very, very trivial load, but their technique is on point. I just think like, dude, like that kid very early on has really solid like proprioceptive like control and ability. They are going to be strong in more compromising ranges of motions or compromising just positions. If they want to be any sort of athlete, it's only going to help them, right? It's only going to make them that much better an athlete. A lot of times you see a lot of kids get to, high school and they're just good, raw. Like they're just a raw athlete and they're really, really good. And then they start to get into like Olympic lifting and more strategic resistance training. Just imagine if that was like inverted, right? Like before they even got into football, they were just always doing push-ups or getting used to a barbell at some capacity or, dumbbells and moving their body in certain ways that are a little different than what they're going to do on the field. However, it is going to give them, I think, just like a head start, like a good launching pad. And so for me, being, I think my 7th grade year, I was like 5'2". Take it back. Sorry, 6th grade year, I was like 5'2". My 7th grade year, I was 5'11". So in a summer, I shot up like fucking 7-8 inches, and you'd have thought I had noodles for arms. Right, like I was the most uncoordinated son of a bitch. Like I would play basketball with my own teammates, go to get a rebound, and people would get hit in the eye and shit like that. Like, but you can't put me down and say, "Hey, listen, we're not going to play you because I'm the tallest kid by a foot." So you have to put me on the court, right? But if I had something that I was doing while I was growing, that I could continue to train my body with every inch that I was, growing, maybe that adjustment period wouldn't have been so latent for me. Maybe it wouldn't take me so long to get used to my body. And I think that that's obviously a very exaggerated version of that. Not every kid's going to shoot up a foot in a summer, but you get the point. Like introducing it early and often, not only does it help that person as an individual to instill good habits, but especially if they're going to be athletes, as young athletes, there are only positive benefits here.
I've always said that if I have kids, they are going to go into gymnastics as soon as they possibly can. And part of this comes from me having coached quite a few young athletes over the years. And in my experience, the most well-rounded, most athletic those with the most body control, most body awareness, the most proprioception have always had a gymnastics background. Always. Every single time. And I could see a kid who was 10 years old and be like, gymnastics? And their parents like, oh yeah. They've been in gymnastics since they were 4 years old. I'm like, I thought so, right? But you just know, because of how they move and how comfortable they are getting into certain positions, a squat pattern, being able to do pull-ups, being able to just control their body. Like they're not only strong in the proprioceptive sense, but also like they just have a lot of body strength. Like it's so weird to see like a 6-year-old girl doing like, 10 reps of perfect pull-ups, right? But gymnasts do that no fucking big deal. So in terms of structured training, I've always thought that, the younger that you can get kids into something that will teach them very good habits, the better. And it's funny that you brought this part up too, because I left a comment on Jordan Duggar, our friend, his Instagram post, maybe this would have been a few weeks ago, I think. And like this post inadvertently ended up going like super viral. And I was just trolling in the comments. Then it was him and his son, and they were doing these, farmers carries with kettlebells. And his son is like, I don't know, like 2 years old now, I think. But I commented, I was like, you're going to stun his growth. And I said it in a way that was like very blunt, very straight face. Like if someone didn't know the relationship that Jordan and I had, they would probably think that I was being serious. I think at this point, there's probably like 500 replies to that comment because it ended up going so viral. And my comment has been liked by like, I don't know, 1,300 people. And then there was another comment like talking shit to me underneath mine that has like 3,500 likes. And I didn't comment back. I just left that, and I ditched, right? But very clearly, there are a lot of people that believe in the whole stunting of growth, getting young kids into resistance training early on, or closing of growth plates, and a lot of that shit is complete debunked bullshit. Like it's not even close to being anywhere near the truth. But one thing that I do think is less often talked about and should be talked about more often than this whole like potential to stunt kids' growth is potential to fuck kids up by just teaching them really poor technique whenever they're very young and very liable, and they're soaking up all of this information, all of this knowledge, especially about how their body is moving and how their body is working. And you use the example of you hitting puberty and exploding like 9 inches over a summer, and that's a similar example here. There's a lot of parallels to hitting puberty to just being a toddler learning how to walk, right? Because you have to relearn everything about your body because it's completely foreign. So immediately post-puberty is another great time to be able to take kids, grow them into something that is very structured with a coach, with a mentor who knows what the fuck they're doing and can teach them proper technique, proper exercise execution, how to do full weight, or excuse me, a full range of motion, body weight squat, a snatch, a clean and jerk, a pull-up, how to do a lunge, how to do a bench press, how to do a deadlift, right? Like teaching them the proper ways to do all of these pretty complex movement patterns that would serve those kids so much value, not even just into their teenage years, into their young adult years, literally for the rest of their life. Like if they had someone who could step in whenever they're 12, 13 years old and just teach them the correct way to do, let's say 10 movement patterns, they're pretty much set for life. They are absolutely on the perfect track to not only get strong, grow a lot of muscle, but also like keep their body healthy. And this actually feeds really well into one of mine, because one of the pieces of advice that I would give to myself would be to find someone who I could learn from and who I could shadow and who could coach me or mentor me in the right ways of doing things. And the caveat here is that it's really hard to know who is giving you good advice versus who is just overly confident and thinks that they're an expert and likes the sound of their own voice, right? Because if you go in any commercial gym, you can go into LA Fitness And there is no shortage of people wanting to give you advice. That's everywhere. So the challenging aspect of this is less about finding people who are willing to give advice. And it's more about like, okay, well, how do we filter the people who are worth listening to from those who we should probably just avoid at all costs? And another troubling aspect of this is, a lot of the people who we should be avoiding are, high school strength coaches, or their personal trainers, or they're the friends that you have that get you into the gym and you guys start training and they are not there to actually correct your shitty technique. They just continue to stroke your ego and tell you to one more rep, add more load, right? These landmines are fucking everywhere whenever you're a kid, especially if you're, I hate to even say it like this, but if you're like a young male, you run into these issues a lot more because the ego is unchecked. It's unchecked, and that can be your downfall very early on. But yeah, like if you can find someone who is knowledgeable, who knows what they're talking about, who has a sense of restraint, and they're able to only stay in the domain that they have a lot of expertise and knowledge in, then that's so invaluable whenever you're young. And the reason why I added that last caveat actually was because there are certain people who I feel like are good in the bodybuilding sense. Being good in the bodybuilding sense does not mean that you're good in a program design sense. So there are a lot of overlapping skills, but a lot of the overlap looks like a Venn diagram, or like this multi-dimensional Venn diagram. Because I'm sure that this is something that's very apparent to you, and I probably don't even need to say to you, but maybe to people who are listening, the skill sets that are involved with being a really, really, really good strength coach or personal trainer, they're multifaceted. There are a lot of things that you have to know and things that you have to be proficient in and have expertise in and experience in, outside of just being able to watch someone squat or watch someone do a clean and jerk or a deadlift and know if it's good versus bad, or know if it's a high injury risk versus if you can let them continue on. And that is a completely tangential skill from being able to sit behind a program and disconnect the athlete from it and say, is this a good program for this type of person? And those are almost completely uncorrelated in a lot of ways too. But being able to do those things and being able to have someone help you do those things whenever you're young, it at least will get you on the right track. And it will at least provide you with the knowledge where maybe in the future you can do those things on your own. And at a very minimum, you'll be able to know whenever you're doing things wrong. And I think that if you're looking for something that will keep you out of the most trouble, just having an intuitive sense of right versus wrong whenever you're in the gym or whenever you're looking at a program, that will get you like 95% of the way there for most people, at least.
Yeah, no, I mean, 100%. It's interesting. Like you said, the ego gets in the way for a lot of people, whether it's the coach or the mentor position that is being filled. That person probably doesn't know as much as they are thought to know, but they feel like they have to know it. And admitting ignorance or admitting just a lack of experience is out of the question. So like you said, you just get a person who's like, yeah, one more rep, like push harder. Like they just think, well, shit, if I just beat the fuck out of you, if I just make you feel like this is really hard, then you'll think that I'm doing a really good job. And I never have to admit that I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. And then there's the ego of, I don't want to actually ask anybody. Like I don't want to appear, ill-equipped, unprepared, or like I don't know something. And that's just not something I think I've ever felt. I always I was very cognizant of my circle. I always wanted my friends to be different than me, both in the way they looked, how they were built, what they did, the sports they played, and I always wanted them to be better than me in some capacity, right? Like I had friends who were excellent swimmers. I was not a great swimmer. I wasn't going to drown, but I was not a great swimmer. But they would go to the lake every day. So I would go to the lake with them 2 times a week because I wanted to be a better swimmer. Like my best friend growing up, Dom, played football together all the way up from, early years, but then also 8th grade all the way up through college. I always stood next to him during sprints because he was faster than me. And I was a watcher. So I wanted to know not just, okay, I was a watcher. I didn't just want to beat you. I wanted to know why you were beating me. So I would see how you started. I would see where your strides were. Those were things that were really, really important to me. So I say all that. It's the same way we met, right? Like Bryce was just this big jacked motherfucker at the back of class who was answering all the questions. And then I happened to see him in the gym and I just like walked up and I'm like, hey, bro, like, this is my name. What's your name? Do you train with anybody? Because you're always just in here with your hoodie up and you just seem to be in your own world. Like, if it's not too much trouble, can I kick it with you? And you're like, yeah, sure. And you proceeded to try to like murder me for the next however long. But I mean, I just kept showing up and it was a good time. And I learned a lot because not only were you a great teacher because you had lived it and you were doing it, there was also an aspect of like, I'm just a watcher. Like I wanted to beat you. So I needed to know why you were winning. And so I would watch how you set up. I would watch where your feet were. I would watch how your tempo, like I wanted to know those things. And then when you offered correction, it wasn't a chink in my armor. It was a way for me to fortify my own. Like now I know better. I can go be better. I can be less wrong tomorrow. And I think more of that's important. You might be hard pressed to find a really good mentor or teacher, but there's nothing wrong with recognizing that someone is better than you right now and surrounding yourself with that person and just watching that person very, very closely. And then once you've mastered where they are, right? If they're just a stagnant person, they're not getting any better. Once you've beat them, find someone else. Find someone else, find someone else, find someone else. And that's a really good way to make sure that you're always getting better. As long as you stay open to correcting, staying open to getting better and broadening what you currently understand when presented with new and better information, you will be on a right track.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with the last point that you made. I want to make a separate quick point just about being extremely cautious when looking to success as an indicator of expertise, because we both know how this industry, and specifically like anything that has a high genetic component, it's so easy to look at someone who is quote unquote better than you, more muscular than you, stronger than you, and assume that they're doing something right or they have some knowledge that you don't possess. So then you look at that person and say, okay, let me study them, see what they're doing. And sometimes that can absolutely work, right? For sure. Sometimes it can. But sometimes it can lead you down a disastrous path, because there are a lot of cases of people who look phenomenal, are very successful in some kind of strength or physique sport, and who do pretty much nothing right. Like, if anything, if you were to look at their training, look what they do, it's almost like, are you trying to self-sabotage? Like, it looks like you are actively making choices that are disastrous or that are going to fuck you in the end, right? Like, you can look at some physique competitors, or God damn it, I would hate that there's a fucking physique division, because I can't just say physique sports. Okay, so if you look at some bodybuilding competitors and you look at their diets, it's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, are you a child? Like, do you remember Dwight Howard's fucking diets, bro? You remember that shit? Like, whenever that
Yes.
stuff came out, where it's like he was eating like a box of Skittles every single day, something like that. So that's a great example of like what not to do, right?
DK Metcalf has one meal a day and like 3 bags of
Yeah.
candy.
Yeah, yes, exactly, right? So like, if you're someone who is aspiring to be an elite athlete, you should hopefully be able to see the difference between like a Dwight Howard diet versus a LeBron James diet, versus how those two people, objectively elite athletes, elite genetic specimens on their own, but how they treat their bodies, right? And it's pretty indicative of one's longevity versus the other's longevity. Dwight Howard had an incredible fucking peak. Honestly, wouldn't say comparable with LeBron's, but like they peaked at about the same time, and Dwight was a fucking force, man. Like crazy to watch peak Dwight Howard. And that motherfucker fell off so fast.
Yeah.
So fast. Like, that was such a fast decline. I know he had a lot of injury issues, but still, you know?
I mean, that plays into it, right? Like how you take care of your body.
It makes you wonder if, like, okay, this is what your diet was like. What else were you doing that we were not seeing off of the court that was potentially going to limit your ability to stay at that elite level for a long time, right? With LeBron, we never had that concern. With him, you knew that motherfucker was a family man. So whatever he was doing out outside of Savannah, like no one gives a shit. But like at the end of the day, like he had priorities, and no one could ever question like LeBron's dedication to being the best for a very long time. He took care of his body to the infinite degree, and it obviously shows. Like the motherfucker is the best of all time. He's like number one in every statistical category. It's at this point in my mind, like it's inarguable, right? But again, it's like if you think about, okay, like you give Dwight Howard LeBron's work ethic, what could he have been? You know. So just getting back to the main point here, it's like sometimes being able to just look at the people who are successful does not give you the information to be able to determine if that person is worth listening to whenever they give you advice, you know, or worth copying whenever it comes to their habits, their work ethics, the things that they're doing in the gym. And I'm sure we can both look to people that we know that are, you know, very muscular, very strong from the outside looking in, seem to be some kind of authority based on their physique or their accomplishments. And then you look at how they train, or you have a conversation with them about training, and you're like, there's a lot left to be desired here, right? Like you're clearly leaning into your genetics pretty strongly because there's not much else that's playing into this, you know? And I think that it's a good point, right? You know, maybe the better way of framing this is like, look at people who have done the most with their genetic endowment and listen to them, right? If someone has taken their physique from like skinny fat to, you know, Mr. Olympia level, or maybe not even Mr. Olympia level, but like high level, like national bodybuilder, then they might be worth listening to more. Phil Heath, who was pretty much always going to be Phil Heath with a little bit of PEDs and a little bit of training. So again, it's like there are a lot of people that have a lot of knowledge, but you look at them and you wouldn't really know it. And there are also a lot of people who, by looking at them, you would expect that they would have a lot of knowledge or a lot of relevant knowledge, and they potentially are doing almost everything wrong, and they're just leaning too heavily into their genetics.
100%. Yeah, I'm probably a little less, and when I say a little, I mean like a fraction less pessimistic in the way that, and this goes back to like responsible consumption of information, right? When I am encouraging people, hey, if someone is ahead of you in business, in the gym, as an athlete, there's a high likelihood, in my opinion, that they are at least doing something better than what you're doing, right? Something. It could be one thing, it could be 10 things, it could be everything.
It could also be luck.
It could also be luck. Luck's
a big factor, bro.
I don't disagree. I do think, though, there is something to be said for, like, if someone's faster than you, a lot of that is genetics. A lot of that is how you form and what you're able to do. And also, if that person is fast, there's a good chance that if they're not just fast, but they're fast like a collegiate level, that they don't just hang out. Like they are working on staying fast, at least to some capacity, right?
Yeah.
So it might just be in the way that they're their habits. It might not be their actual form. It might not be the placements of their arms or the placement of their head. It might just be their habit. So you just going, oh shit, I've only been sprinting 2 days a week. He sprints 4 days a week. I'm going to do that now, right? And then going, okay, sweet, I've learned everything I can here. Let me move on to the next person who's going to teach me more about head position, starting position, so on and so forth. And so I'm probably a little less pessimistic, while I do agree. You don't want to put too much weight on what anyone is doing just because of the appearance of being ahead of you.
Yeah.
I think the idea of it is sus consumption of like, let me see. And if I can take some things and get better, great. But not because Bryce is big and jacked, everything he says has to be, it's a training bylaw, right? It's like, no, because then your ability to move forward in your own right, to form your own opinions, to form your own thoughts and ideas on how things work or how you should continue progressing, become handicapped. They become chained to what you've now held as Bible because of you, this person. But accepting and going, okay, like this all sounds like better than what I knew. and then meeting someone else or discovering something else or reading something else and going, this now sounds better than what he taught me. And being able to do that and that iterative process is a part of it. And I think the reason why I like that model probably more than seeking a mentor is that it's so hard to find a really good mentor. And there's a lot of people who wasted a lot of time finding mentors because they're like, okay, obviously we know I can't make overnight changes. Like there's a good chance that starting with this person's going to feel like starting with anybody, right? If they're a good person who has any sort of level like of attention to their clients and they make you feel good, you're going to feel good until, you know, you get to a point where like, hey, I'm not really progressing the way I want. Maybe it's the coach, maybe it's me. And I think that you can spin your wheels and you can end up on this like, you know, atmosphere, this mentality because like, well, fuck, like nothing's working. Like, how do I find someone who works for me? I once worked with Butch Reynolds on just my starting position in sprints and stuff, like in college. And in a day, Butch helped me shave off 0.05 of my 40, right? Just with starting position, where my head was at, my first drive. Most 99.9% of your experiences are not going to be that with a coach, right? They're going to say some things like, oh, this is great, but you're not going to see this immediate uptake of like, fuck, this is valuable. I'm going to stay.
Yeah.
So then how do you sort through that? And I think that that's where I think the low risk, the low cost, the low mental effort might be observation until you really do observe someone or talk to someone where you're like, okay, fuck, like this is all really aligning with the things that I've been learning and they're expanding on this and they show a true harnessing of this knowledge and capability of being able to implement it with themselves and others.
I agree with that. And maybe a really good way of like encapsulating this is focus on and pay attention to the things that are more driven by making good decisions and having good habits versus the things that are innate. So the way I think about this is would I listen to Curry's advice on shooting or would I listen to LeBron's advice on jumping?
Right.
The
Steph.
former.
Yeah.
Steph, exactly. Yeah. So, and for anybody who doesn't understand that reference, it's Steph Curry's shooting is a skill. It's a skill. He didn't come out of the womb with the ability to knock down threes at 50%, right? LeBron came out of the womb with a 40-inch vertical, right? Or at least it was going to happen by the time he was an adult, no matter what. It didn't really matter. He literally did not have to lift a single weight, and he still would have been able to jump out of the gym. He'd have been an athletic freak. So yes, Steph Curry's hand-eye coordination is probably 99.99 percentile, but he still had to practice a lot to get the ball in the hoop. And I think that that's a very important point. Like, think about and pay attention to the things that are actually provable and things that are like principled. And if you can lean into the principles to be able to then carry over into making your training better over the long run. So again, proper exercise technique, being able to build a program from the ground up, being able to modify that program as you're going, being able to make sure that it's always aligned with your why and your macro goals, and being able to understand how the micro goals can then feed into the macro goals and all that stuff. If you understand those things, like training variables, right? Like it seems so basic to us, so basic, but most people have no fucking idea what any of that stuff means. And if you can find someone who can provide you with that knowledge and help teach you that stuff from relatively early age, then you're going to be able to be in a fucking phenomenal spot by the time you're an adult. Do we want to do one more really quick?
Yeah, my last one was my best one, so we'll just go ahead and knock out this last one.
Cool. Want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so the last one that I wanted to say was progress slowly and in spurts. And what I mean by that is because all of this is such a long game. Everything with training, and everybody talks about it with, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? That's the cliche around all of it. I think that it can be a sprint at times, and I think that it can be a marathon at times, and I think that at other times you can just sit down and chill. And that's okay. That's how it should be. And in a lot of ways, that will beat just running a marathon for the entire time. And if you can understand that progress is not going to be linear, it is going to be very sporadic. It's going to sawtooth up and down. There are going to be times whenever you feel like you're making a fuck ton of progress very quickly. There are going to be times whenever you feel like you're regressing. But the more that you can just keep a very slow, steady pace, and if you can plan for that pace to be slow and steady rather than being really aggressive, or rather than feeling really good for a few months and trying to force the issue and force and squeeze as much progress as you can out of those few months, you can avoid falling into those traps, which are very difficult, right? It's very, very difficult to not ride waves of momentum. But the more that you can stretch momentum out over a year, over 2 years, over 3 years, by being very intelligent with the way that you program, the more that that progress is going to stick. And you're not going to have these drastic slides of regression, or long periods of stagnation, or periods where you have to take a break because you're injured, or because you have this issue that's flared up and now all of a sudden you can't train legs anymore because you fucked yourself, because you were not able to account for the inevitabilities whenever you were making really good progress. You're like, I'm just going to continue to roll with this, and I'm indestructible, and I'm not going to worry about all of these things that my body are telling me, and I'm just going to worry about all that stuff later on, right? But if you can, from a very early training age, get it through your head that progress is meant to be slow. Don't try and keep up with the Joneses. Don't look at everyone else around you making really great progress. If you can avoid the temptation of things like PEDs to get a quick hit of progress, but forsake a lot of other things like longevity, like health, like injury risk, because again, PEDs are always going to increase your injury risk. So things like that, right? But if you can get that through your head, and if also you can understand that progress, again, is not going to be linear. There are going to be times whenever you need to absolutely think in terms of making progress. So periodic progress, phased product or phasic progress. But then also there are going to be times whenever you need to just chill, maintenance mode, right? Maintaining is progress. Recharging, recovering is progress. And if you can get that through your head, if you can wrap your mind around that concept of progression, then you're going to be better off than pretty much everyone else. But I say that with the understanding that pretty much no mortal person, no rational human being is going to be able to do those things, right? Because it's very hard to keep a restrictor plate on yourself whenever you're training and you're feeling really good and things are going well. It's hard to plan for the future whenever they inevitably will slow down and not go well. And it's also very hard to think about times of training without the intention of making deliberate progress, right? It's I'm going to go in and train with the goal of maintaining. That feels counterintuitive in a lot of ways. The longer that you are in the gym, the longer that you do this, the more that you understand the value of trying to break your training up into very deliberate times of push, chill, push, chill, push, chill. And, we have this with our clients. It's more of a natural break, but if our clients who compete, there's push during a prep, chill on the other side of a prep whenever you're recovering and you're getting back to some kind of set maintenance calories, and then you push again through the off season. Maybe there is some point in the off season where you chill, maybe you go on a vacation, right? But those are more natural landmarks. But whenever you don't compete, whenever you're not an athlete that has some kind of event coming up, you still have to think in the same frame of mind. You have to break things up into some sort of periodization. You have to say, all right, cool. This is whenever I'm going to push myself very hard. And on the other end of this, I'm going to shift it up and push a slightly different way. And then maybe at the end of that, I'm going to chill for a little bit, go into maintenance, go into an active recovery phase, do something a little bit different, test my body, strain my body in a way that it's not used to, but still bringing up some other, trait quality like work capacity. And then, go back through that cycle again. But yeah, that's obviously what I'm saying here is the crux periodization model. So I could have summed up all of that just saying periodize your training, but I think it's more useful to understand what periodized training actually means it really just means like the way that you approach training should be broken up into periods where you push a little bit harder, other times whenever you train less hard, and then other times whenever you don't even train at all. And all of that, if done correctly, will lead to better outcomes than just always trying to push super hard.
Yeah, I have two metaphors here. One metaphor that I like, as you were saying that, I think about on a micro and a macro level, right? Being able to zoom in and zoom out and always note areas of progression, even in those chill times. You know, when I get on a bike every single day, I might start at like a 5, right? Resistance. And then I'll go up to like a 10. And then I'll come down to like a 7. And now that 7 feels like my new 5, right? So like, but it's even in that chilling period, right? The hanging out, I have progressed on what chilling used to be for me. And then I go up to like a 15 and come down to like a 12 and so on and so forth, right? And then take it and zoom out a little bit. In 2 weeks, I might start at a 7 and go up to a 12, right? And then like again, continue to oscillate between the two, bouncing up. And so now you have almost compounding progression that's happening there, even though I quote unquote have times of where I'm pulling back, right? In this like very, very like zoomed in space. And it's, like you said, super important to be able to recognize progression in a myriad of ways in all the facets, because it's not just adding load, it's not just adding volume, right? Work capacity, even just like overall stability, recoverability. These are all things you can pay attention to as a form of like, I'm getting better still, right? And if I want to keep getting better, those moments of like, I'm not going to train this week because I want to keep getting better, and not training this week doesn't slow me down. If anything, training this week might actually stall things, might stagnate things. And you and I talked a lot about this on various podcasts, right? But like minimal dose, right? Like, and I think that's the cool part and most important piece about having a coach is I'm going to encourage you to do more than last week, but not the most you can do, because I think about it kind of like, and this is still like a loose metaphor I've used with a couple of clients. So like if we're in a car and we're going straight, I want to be able to do the next mile slightly faster than we did the previous mile, but not the fastest. And I want to do the next mile a little faster, the next mile a little faster. And yes, this is quote unquote linear progression. However, you want to be able to enjoy that as long as you can. And the quicker you get to your top speed, the quicker you get to pedal to the metal, the quicker you get to where to now. And you want to avoid that space for as long as you can, right? You want to make sure that you have enough, just temperance in how you're approaching things, that you can get as much from this period, from this stretch of road as you can before you have to go, well, fuck, I have to change something. I have to get into a new car or do whatever. Something has to change, and you want to stave that off for as long as possible.
I think a really good way. So as you were going through that, a good way of thinking about that as well is like, what will get you further? What will get you further? Is it going as fast as you possibly can from the starting line? Or would it be to go up to the speed limit and then every single mile, like you said, go 1 mile per hour faster, 1 mile per hour faster? What will get you further? And also, what will reduce your of crashing and burning the most? If you go right out of the gate 200 miles an hour, you might make it, I don't know, like a little bit. You're probably going to fucking hit a tree, or there's a cop that's going to pull up behind you, or you're just going to run out of gas really quickly, right? So there's a lot that is going to potentially negatively impact your ability to get further and even faster if you're just redlining yourself from the very, very, very get-go, right? So that in itself, I think, is it's a great way of thinking about this slow, steady approach to training in a way that is going to maximize how far you actually get, how much progress you're able to make. But it's taking the long view, right? It's not sexy. It's really not sexy. It's super structured, super fucking boring. But again, I think it goes back to, what are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to accomplish the most fun that you can possibly have? Well, it's really fun to go as fast as you possibly can then, right? But again, the risk there is that you burn out and you get hurt and you don't make it as far as you otherwise might have made it if you'd have just done the slow and steady approach.
Getting better isn't sexy. Like as much as people want to, like it's
Yeah.
not. No matter what you're doing, right? If you want to get better at your job, it's doing your job every day, and it's not really sexy. It's not cross training your job, right? It's not I'm going to do a different job today to get better. No, it's doing your same job over and over and over again. If you want to become a better shooter, you go in and you shoot every single day. Like that's what you do. It's not super sexy or fun, right? And that's a super important thing, I think, for everyone to imprint upon themselves. My final piece here is actually not a mistake. It's something I think we did well. I say we in our times that we've trained together, obviously the time that we spent together. Don't get caught up in the weeds of science. With social media, there's so many minds out here, both on a more like amateur level and then also like quote unquote like experts, right? The Contreras, yeah, I guess. Mike Israel, like you have so many good Israelites. Like you have so many people out here who are super fucking smart, and it's really easy to think that it's that piece, that fact about quad training, that fact about strength, that fact about speed that is separating you from being really, really great. Most of you listening to this, quick ego check for you, are closer to novice and low intermediate than you are to advanced athletes. Spending a lot of time in the micro-analyzing phase of am I doing the right things is costing you. There's an opportunity cost there at just getting better. For most of you, doing something and doing it well and really hard will make you better. You will get better. So you're best off learn proper technique. If you're finding really solid just luck and you feel good deadlifting, conventional deadlift, do that. Keep really good technique. Push really fucking hard. Don't overthink all the science and the shit there that people are throwing at you, because there's a good chance that you're going to hit the brakes too early. You're going to get distracted, and you're going to cost yourself opportunity to continue to get better. Most people will get better by just going and doing something and learning how to train hard. We talked about this before, where because we're so intentional and we're so just precise, when we're giving feedback and suggesting, how to manipulate and do things, there is that catch where it's like, I also don't want you to over focus or overanalyze or hyperfixate here, because there's a good chance, like you said, you start becoming super aware of feedback, or, oh, my knees started to bend more than I wanted to here, or when I was doing it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything, right? You are not nearly advanced enough for the majority of you to be worrying about this. What you should be worrying about and concerning yourself with is, can you push hard? Do you know what failure is like? Can you train hard? Because most of you don't train that hard. So go learn how to do that first. Obviously, you want to make sure that you are learning and you instill good technique, good practice, good for thoughtfulness to stave off injury. But just a quick aside there, you will get injured. If you do it long enough and you do it hard enough, you will get injured. So you can't completely avoid it. So just accept that. But go train really fucking hard, regroup, train hard again, regroup, train hard. And then eventually when you get to a point where you are just, in the top percent and you're like, training hard doesn't get me there anymore, what's next? Then worry about it. But right now is probably not the time at 20 years old to hyperfixate on, am I doing this? Is the proper volume here? What's going? Just go train hard, bro. I promise you, bro or young lady, you will get better.
No, yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's where having a good understanding of training principles comes in handy. And everyone should, especially if this is something that you're very passionate about, everyone should at least semi-literate whenever it comes to things like anatomy, things like physiology, like biomechanics, like, kinesiology or principles of kinesiology, especially whenever it relates to like hypertrophy training, right? And there's a lot of big words that I'm throwing out, but, understanding things like volume, like intensity, like RAR, RPE, and how those go back and feed back into intensity, frequency, tempo, right? You need to understand these concepts, and they're very simple concepts for the most part, right? At their most base level, they're very simple. You can add an infinite arbitrary level of complexity to any of this shit, though, which is where I feel like we've run into some problems. Is it is very simple to complexify pretty much anything that you want to and make yourself feel very important, right? So we've talked about this whenever it comes to specific exercise selection. There are a lot of people that are in our industry that have made themselves feel very important by basically arguing about the semantics of whether one exercise is better than the other at the most distant margins of practicality you could ever imagine. And that's all fine and dandy. But again, like most people don't give a fuck about that. It's not relevant to 99.9% of people. And you're arguing just to hear your voice. Like it doesn't matter. And no one should actually put that much value into the things that are being talked about, right? Again, from an intellectual level, great, cool, let's have those conversations. But whenever people start taking these things as like gospel and trying to somehow feed that back into their own training, they've been working out for like 6 fucking months. Like, just train hard. You're 160 pounds, dude. You don't need to worry about this shit. Fuck, man, you probably don't even need to worry about what periodization is. You don't need to worry about hardly anything at that point. If you're skinny and you don't have a lot of muscle and you're very weak, just go do something fucking hard. Just go lift a stone and carry it for a little bit. It really doesn't matter because you don't have the luxury of worrying about all of the specific shit that really jacked, really strong people tend to worry about. And that's not me being an asshole about it or me saying that these things are unimportant, but like you need to understand what level of importance you are at right now, right? And if you don't have the luxury or even the necessity to worry about some of these things, if it just shouldn't be important for you at this moment, then don't worry about it. Don't worry about it yet, right? Again, if you can perform a squat with a passable, don't worry so much about whether a barbell squat is better than a Smith squat, or is better than a hack squat, or is better than a pendulum squat, or how that relates to leg extensions for quad growth, right? If you're skinny, none of that fucking matters. Just go do something. Just go do something hard, and you're going to be okay. And once you start stagnating on whatever that hard thing is that you chose, maybe start thinking about, is that barbell squat better than that Smith squat, better than that hack squat, better than that pendulum squat, how that relates to a leg extension for quad growth. Maybe start thinking about that stuff. Whenever you stagnate after you've done things mostly right for whatever it is that you decided to do, but just fucking pick a path and start doing something quote unquote correctly for that path. But man, yeah, I can't agree with that enough. And my opinion on a lot of that stuff. I feel like, unfortunately, maybe this just comes with the ego aspect of being an quote unquote industry expert. But a lot of people that are in the fitness industry, like they tend to get lost in arguments about the most useless shit. Like no one should ever be caring so much about these things, but because they're very smart individuals and they have contributed some pretty useful stuff, in the past, they tend to get like an outsized amount of attention for the current discussions that they're having, the current things that they're putting out. But I do think that it's a unhelpful distraction for the majority of trainees that are coming in just looking for a right direction. Mm-hmm. They're looking for where to get started. And if you throw too many very complicated concepts and too many complex movements at someone who just is trying to get their feet on the ground and they're just trying to figure out where they should begin, yeah, I mean, you're going to create some potentially large issues that have to maybe be rectified in the future, or you're just going to create a generation of very small, weak people because they're doing advanced exercises as a fucking novice.
Yeah, I think to your point and a closing digression, you have people that, that was the most politically safe way I've ever heard anyone describe the situations we're talking about, obviously, with the individuals that argue over the minutiae, over the margins, the things that virtually matter for 0.0001% of the population, right? Like almost no one. And it's a signaling, right? And I think that the unfortunate part of this is that we know that women are the major consumers of like fitness mentors, coaches, so on and so forth, right? And so there is a strong signaling that's happening, because not only are women a very ready consumer of coaching and fitness, like assistance, help, etc., also are probably the most adherent. They are the most like, I'll do whatever you tell me to do, right? As long as I trust you. And so there's like the signaling for like, trust me, because I can use big words and I can argue about things that probably go way over your head because they don't fucking matter for you. But because I can do that, you inherently trust me a bit more. And because I can argue with other, respected minds in the space, you inherently trust me more. When in actuality, I'm just wasting time. I could be helping you. I could just be helping you. But instead, I'm wasting time to make sure that you revere me as some sort of, deity in the space. And it's just counterproductive. Go train hard. I promise you, you will see far more progress just getting up and going to do hard things. Because, again, to my earlier point, you're not nearly as advanced as you think you are. And there's a lot to be gained for you by just going out and intensifying your training in whatever way that looks for you. But just go make it hard.
Do you think a part, just not to extend this longer than it needs to be, but do you think that a part of this is coming from and stemming from a race to the bottom in terms of content creation and in terms of getting engagement and attention on what you're putting out? Because for me, it seems like if you're posting exotic variations and if you're putting out opinions that are intentionally inflammatory and controversial, and if you're debating things that really don't matter, but they're still debates nonetheless, it feels like to me a lot of that kind of created. It's kind of inorganic in the sense that, would these things be happening if there wasn't an audience that you're competing over? You know what I mean? Or if we were restrained or constrained to talk about and make content about and post about the things that matter, and if we had to do that by magnitude of impact and relevance, like the majority of this stuff would never even get brought up, right? But I feel like it gets brought up because people just run out of ideas and they run out of things to talk about, right? It's like you can only talk about how important volume and training hard and frequency and program design and eating a balanced diet and making sure that you get enough sleep and managing your stress. You can only talk about those things so many times and so often. No one pays attention to you anymore. And they're like, okay, great, but like, where are the cool exercises? What the fuck, man? Like where are the fun things? What am I supposed to do here? But then you have someone like, Brett Contreras that consistently puts out like fucking goofy looking exercises. And it's like, okay, cool. That might have some applicability. Some, maybe, right? How much? How much should we care about this thing? And, same thing for Cassim. Yeah, I guess I'll just throw names out now. But yeah, same things for like all of these people, where there's so much that I feel like, very bright people, very smart people could contribute if they were to just limit themselves to talking about what actually makes a difference versus what is like so far at the margins to where you're only talking about people who want like a quick dopamine hit for like their next workout. And I think that that's where we kind of have gotten a little bit lost in terms of like what we're talking about and what we're debating and what we're arguing. Is like, I've always thought that the debate between, failure versus like submaximal training, I thought that that was always relevant, but then it quickly devolved and turned into something completely different. And then same thing with like volume versus intensity, like what's more impactful and important. That's a very useful, very fruitful debate, because the magnitude of impact of that and the scope of impact and how many people it has relevance for is pretty broad. But you're talking about like, okay, is this hip thrust variation better B stance or unilateral or with a landmine or whatever bullshit? Like, no one cares, bro. Like, absolutely no one fucking cares. No one cares. So it does feel to me like it's more like, okay, who can gather like the most audience here? Who can create content in a way that is going to be pulling in the most eyeballs, and who can artificially create controversy, conflict in a way, bringing even more people into this and making you appear more relevant for longer.
I view it like celebrity drama, where I am suspicious enough that I believe that the majority of celebrity drama that gets leaked is leaked for relevance sake. You know,
Probably,
we
yeah.
have a rap beef because, hey, shit, like, why not? Let's go ahead and ramp up, business for ourselves, streams for ourselves by telling everyone that, like, fuck this guy, right? Or I might actually feel like fuck this guy, but I'm gonna tell the whole world fuck this guy because people now are gonna be like, maybe it's not completely fabricated, but still you are putting on a show because you want to, garner eyeballs. And then there's also, I think, like you said, there's not a, which is why, we know that for a lot of our content, when we offer context, when we quote unquote like hedge a bet, it's full of integrity because it's like, hey, like we should give way to, variance and uniqueness here. And also we know why other people do not, because it's
Yeah.
sexier for a person to come in and just be told like this is the best. I think, and probably you to an extent as well, long game is I have to be open to changing my own mind. If I tell you resoundingly that this is what I'm going to live and die by, and then I change my mind in 6 months or in 6 years, well, I think that actually decreases my credibility to you. If you're smart, if you're an intelligent person, right? And so I would rather a Contreras come out and be like, hey, listen, there are so many ways to train the glutes because I'm a tinkerer. You're a tinkerer. Like when we have time, we like to fuck around with things. It's fun. You're just tinkering, bro. Like you're just having fun. And that's cool. Hey, if you're getting tired of hip thrusts, if you're getting tired of RDLs and stiff leg deadlifts or whatever, look at this thing that I've been tinkering around with. And if you want to throw in science, like, yeah, you get excellent activation here, that we put it on this, great. But arguing over what's better and what's not, one, I think you set yourself up because if something comes out, like think eggs, right? When everyone was going, eggs are bad for you, eggs are bad for you, eggs are bad for you. And then it's like, actually, they're not. It's like, well, now everyone who said that they were looks like a fucking idiot. Like, so to me, if you thought more like that, I feel like you would actually set yourself up for more success, not only in the future, but in the immediate of like, hey, like, I'm not saying this is better than anything. I'm having fun with this. And if you want to reinvigorate some mental zeal into your training session today and skip hip thrust for this, by all means, go ahead and do that. I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying it's fun. Good yawn.
Great.
Word. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Bryce and I were talking about this earlier. Like, we do want to continue to mix more things in there that I think gives our own like personal stories, personal anecdote, because I think that it does color a lot of what we think and how we think and the science that we do hold dear. But then also maybe when we might stray a bit away from textbook, I think it also lends itself to more conversation. So we'll definitely try to mix more of this in. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you have lessons you've learned on your own. We'd love to talk about those as well. So thank you again, and we will see you next time.